I'm Drew Stevenson. This is for my Law and Economics seminar. And here we're going to be talking about nudge or the nudge theory. This is a way to bring behavioral law and economics into the sphere of our legal rules. The basic idea is that we're talking about how we frame people's decisions or some of the micro decisions that we let people make, the options that we make available to people can affect or tilt their decisions one way or the other. And that maybe we should frame people's decisions in a way that they choose the option that's better for them or most people. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about some of the critiques of it. It's a really popular idea based on a best-selling book called Nudge by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler that my law students in law and economics should be aware of. So let's dive in. So before the book came out called Nudge, Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler published some academic articles where they talked about something called libertarian paternalism, which is obviously an oxymoron or a paradox. And the libertarian aspect was that they wanted people to get to make their own choice, to be free to do what they want, to opt out of things that are really bad for them or make them uncomfortable, and so forth. The paternalism component is that choices that people have a lot of times are already partly made in how the church choice is presented. And so the architect of the choice or the choice architect can influence a little bit which way people choose. And I'm going to give you some examples in order to help them live longer or be healthier or be happier. So, in other words, the goal is to steer people in a particular direction without restricting their movement or forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. So, as law students know, a lot of our legal prohibitions and regulations and things like that are a bright line rule, right? This is more of a shove than a nudge, where we prohibit something or require something. And this could be pretty burdensome on people in some cases. And it is also going to impose burdens on the government to monitor and enforce the rule, to punish violators or reward people who comply and so forth. Sunstein and Thaler define a nudge as something that's low cost for everybody involved, but can have a high impact and also be non-coercive. So, in other words, the person still has the option to make a choice in the end about what's best for them. We've just structured the choice a little bit differently. And so any aspect of choice architecture that might alter the behavior in a predictable way without forbidding options. And in other words, to count as a nudge, the intervention must be easy and cheap to avoid. So I want to give you three of the famous examples and also some counterexamples. So let's talk about healthy foods. We found that whether it's in a lunch cafeteria or lunchroom or in the grocery store, that whatever is put at eye level for people is what they're more likely to buy, as opposed to things that are down on the floor or things that they have to look way up and reach for. In fact, some manufacturers will pay retailers to place their product in that premium real estate right at most people's eye level when they're browsing in a store or a retail outlet. So the idea with nudge is, what if we had a rule or maybe an incentive that retailers should put healthy options, if it's food sales like broccoli and fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that, at people's eye level. So it's really presented right in front of them. And then put unhealthy foods like junk food on the shelf that's near the floor or that they have to look up for. And so this isn't telling people you can't buy unhealthy food or you have to eat vegetables. We're just presenting the vegetables to you kind of front and center so that you'll be more aware of them and think about it before you rule it out. This is different from a shove, like a simple ban on junk food or sodas or unhealthy things like cigarettes, that maybe we should just make the healthy option this slightly easier option or the more obvious option for people, but people still have a choice. Another example is about 401k plans with employers. And so I don't want to bore you to death with this, but this is a type of benefit that an employer can provide where you have some small withholding from your paycheck if you're a worker that gets put in a savings and investment account that basically has really great tax benefits for the worker. And some employers will do matching funds. So if you withhold 3% of your paycheck, whatever that is, they will contribute themselves that extra money to kind of incentivize you to do it. In other words, it's more than your salary that now the employer is paying you. So for the vast majority of people, most investment advisors agree 401ks are a great option. They're really great to build wealth and save for retirement and things like that. But researchers have found a funny thing. If you have to sign up for the 401k, a lot of workers won't do it. So if you make them take an extra step to request it or to fill out a form and or check a box or something like that, if your default rule is that unless they say they want it, you don't give it to them, a lot of them won't sign up for it, even though they would really benefit from a 401k in the long run. And the ones that don't have it regret later not having it. Conversely, if you have the default rule being that people are automatically going to participate in the 401k, but if for some reason they think that's a bad deal for them or they object to it or don't like 401ks for a variety of reasons, they can opt out, no questions asked. So all they have to do is fill out a form saying, I don't want to participate in the 401k, don't withhold any money from my paycheck, and the employer will do that. Well, the weird thing is if we change what the default rule is, a lot more people will do the 401k and benefit from it. And years later, they're kind of happy that that was the default rule because they might have opted out of it. They might not have opted into it and they would have regretted it later. So this is a weird thing from a law and economic standpoint. I want my students to appreciate the costs and benefits of doing the 401k don't change at all if it's opt in or opt out, right? So you're still either going to come out way ahead or not come out ahead with your 401k. The fact that you had to raise your hand or fill out a form to sign up or raise your hand to opt out shouldn't make a difference in the outcome, but it really affects what people choose. So another famous example with nudge is about organ donation. In the United States, you can opt in to have your organs donated to other people when you die, but you have to fill out a form or a legal document to do that. The default rule is that nobody's going to harvest your organs unless you affirmatively declared that that's what you wanted. A lot of Western European countries, industrialized countries, have the opposite default rule. So they have organ donation, but it's opt out. So the default rule is everybody's organs, when they die, are going to be donated to people that need them. But if that makes you uncomfortable or you have a religious objection, all you have to do is fill out a legal document and you can keep your organs after you die. They won't be donated. So the cost benefit analysis should be the same either way. You're either getting to keep your organs or donate them, and you have the choice. But the difference in the default rule dramatically affects the rate of organ donation and consequently the shortages and waiting lists for donors for someone who needs a kidney or needs a liver or a heart transplant or things like that. The countries that have the default rule that you have to opt out and otherwise we're going to take your organs and give them to people who need them, have a lot more people participate. And it still plays out that the default rule ends up nudging people a lot in terms of what they choose and affecting the outcome, even though the costs and benefits for those individuals shouldn't have changed just based on what the default rule is. So the idea is if that we think we should have more organ donation, then we should just change the default rule If you don't want to do it, you can just opt out. It's not very difficult to opt out. But the fact is, if it's an opt out, most people don't bother to opt out. And so then you have plenty of organs for the people that need them. In other words, there's a lot of inertia that people have. That's the only difference when you change the default rule is some inertia or a bias towards the status quo. Like they just can't be bothered to go to the HR office and fill out the form and check the box to change their option, whether it's for 401ks or organ donation or whatever it is. Humans tend to just stick with the default option because change requires at least a modicum of mental effort. That you have to do something. It may only take a few minutes out of your whole life and or a few seconds, but if people have to do something, then they're less likely to do it. And the other aspect of this is that people don't always make accurate estimates of probabilities or costs or benefits. So, for example, there's studies indicating that when drivers on the road, if they drive past a pullover, like a traffic stop where the police have pulled someone over, everybody slows down and then they drive slower the rest of the day, even though they're miles away from where those police were and not even in the same part of town. They, or if they see a bad accident, if people drive past a bad accident and see some bodies being put into ambulances and smashed up cars, most people subconsciously, without realizing it, drive more safely for the rest of the day after that. People overestimate how likely something is to happen to them. If they hear about a home invasion in their town, their sense of how much danger they're in goes way up, even though statistically the odds that they're going to be the victim of a home invasion might not have changed at all. Maybe we arrested the perpetrator already and it was a one-off incident and it's never going to happen again. But if people hear about a crime in their geographic area, they tend to overestimate how afraid they should be and how much danger they're in. We also tend to have our minds play tricks with us about how happy will be for with a certain outcome, the benefits, or underestimate the costs of things. And so think about all of the people who bought expensive exercise equipment and now it's just basically a towel rack in their house. They never use it. People overestimate how much they're going to use it or underestimate how difficult it's going to be to stay on a strenuous, rigorous exercise regimen day after day after day at home. So we make a lot of bad decisions, costly decisions that we regret later because our mind plays tricks on us about how likely things are to happen and how much we're going to enjoy things in the future or how difficult things are going to be. Sometimes we underestimate or overestimate all of those things. So when we apply nudge in the legal context, a lot of times we're talking about contract law options. Think about things like adhesion contracts or binding arbitration clauses and so forth, and what the default rule is versus what isn't the default unless you put it in the contract. Opt out versus opt in schemes like organ donation can have a big effect that seems irrational almost on what people end up choosing because the benefits and costs to them haven't changed just because of the default rule. Disclosure rules are part of nudge. Sometimes simplifying the instructions or the signage or the labels can make a big difference in what people do. If you simplify complex credit card terms so that they're actually readable, people make different decisions about what credit cards they want and how they use them. Sometimes there's a sort of social verification and that people use as a signal, and it's a little bit irrational. But if the IRS puts out ads saying 90% of the people of your neighbors have already filed their tax returns, you're one of the last people to file, people will actually feel bad and hurry up and file their late tax returns. Because before that, they might have thought that they were normal and it didn't matter, and now they feel like they're deviant from societal norms and it bothers them. They're embarrassed, and so they'll comply. And so government ad campaign that changes people's sense of what the social norm is or what most people are doing can actually have big effects on behavior, sometimes a bigger effect than what you prohibit people from doing or require people to do. Let's talk about some of the criticisms of nudge. One is that we know that there are certain things that people have behavioral biases about or mental biases that are so strong that they really need a shove, not a nudge. Right? So if you talk about compulsive behavior or impulsive behavior, we know that there are certain things that people are impulsive about in general. Think about crimes of passion and so forth. We really do need some bright line, hard and fast rules, not just little nudges that still give people a choice, but frame their choice a little bit differently. The other critique is that this is still paternalistic. Right? You still have some educated elites who think that they know what's good for people better than those people know themselves. Now, in fairness, the people who like nudge and who see themselves as these choice architects have a lot of scientific research that they'll point to. That people are happier if they do this, or healthier if they eat more vegetables, or stop smoking. They live longer if they stop smoking. They'll be better parents if they do this, or the children are more successful in school if they grow up in a home that has a certain number of books around, or parents who read to them. Children are going to be more successful in school if their parents read to them when they're little. But still, it comes down to that you have some people who are pretty confident that they know better than you what's good for you. And some of us kind of resist that. Some of us think that maybe those paternalistic people have some blind spots and biases themselves when they think that they know I would be better off if I stopped doing something or started doing something because of their own limited experience, or they don't really understand the situation, or they're biased because of their upbringing or their subculture, or things like that. The problems with paternalism, the problems with elites being overconfident in their knowledge of what's good for everyone is a valid critique of nudge. It's not a devastating critique. There's still something here to think about and talk about, and that can be valuable. There's times where we have case studies where this type of thing, changing the default rule, has worked wonderfully, has produced really good results. But there are other cases where maybe we jumped the gun a little bit in deciding for people what's good for them. And that concludes our video for Law and Economics about the nudge theory, or Nudge, the book by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. Thanks for watching.